books in the series. And it became very clear to me that when you take prominent musicians, I'm talking about the real A-listers, not every musician out there, but the
Sure.
household names that we're all familiar with. And there are exceptions, but with many of them, you will find that the fathers of these prominent musicians are not what you would have expected them to be, or I wouldn't anyway. So before I started on this research, I would have imagined the fathers of prominent members of rock bands, particularly punk bands, heavy metal bands, maybe hip hop crews, would have had jobs like plumber or builder or construction worker or lorry driver. Regular working class jobs, in other words. My dad was a mechanic. I would have expected to find that sort of job. But I realised that we don't find this, and it's a very strange thing. What we do find is plenty of generals, admirals, lieutenant colonels, judges, Freemasons, politicians, diplomats, jobs of this sort of nature. And one or two of them you could write off as a curiosity. But when
Yeah.
it keeps happening, you start to see a trend and a pattern emerging. And if you're going to be mature about it, and if you're going to be sensible, you have to join the dots and say, hang on a minute, there's something going on here. What first alerted me to this dynamic was the work of Dave McGowan on his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which chronicled the mid to late 1960s rock music scene coming out of Laurel Canyon, this neighborhood in the Hollywood Hills in Los Angeles. And McGowan highlighted in that book how pretty much all of the musicians that populated that scene have dads that ticked those boxes, coming out of expressions of the military or military intelligence or other expressions of the establishment. In other words, not the sort of jobs that you would have expected rock
Yeah.
musicians' dads to have. I wouldn't anyway. And so I delved further into this and I realized it wasn't just limited to Laurel Canyon in the 1960s. We find this dynamic everywhere. And again, it's not every musician out there, but it's enough to make me realize that there's something going on here. And so the central contention of my books is that A-list household name musicians don't get to the top of their field through hard work and crossing their fingers for good luck alone. It's not that they're the best musicians out there. We probably all know of musicians that are much better than the ones we've all heard of, but they never get a break. They never become famous. Why?
Yeah.
Because they don't come from the right families, or they've not sold their soul for fame and fortune, which is an expression that can be taken metaphorically or literally. And the ones that do make it often come from these important bloodline families. So they're elevated to these positions of prominence and they are handed these careers on a plate. These careers are ready made for them by those that can make these sort of things happen. Because unfortunately, the music industry, like every other expression of organized society, is not organic and grassroots. So you don't get to the top just by being the best in your field or working really, really hard. You get to the top of your field because you've been selected to be an asset to push the various agendas that these industries are there for. It's the same in the movie industry, it's the same with television, it's the same with the mainstream media, and it's there big time in the music industry. The music industry is there to push social engineering agendas, to change people's perceptions and ideas and value systems very discreetly and under the radar, all under the guise of entertainment, and to help push so-called globalist New World Order agendas. You know, I'm sorry that's bad news for people to hear. I didn't make it that way. I wish it was some other way, but
Yeah.
I'm merely reporting on what I've found. And so now I'm on the fourth book because there's so much to say about this. And the reason I've churned out four books, I had intended to cap it at three, but it's because the information just never stops. I've heard you comment many times about you get emails every single day.
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
look at this, watch this video, have a look at this book, listen to what this person has to say. It's the same with me. It just never ends. And it got to a point where I had so many hundreds of pieces of information that I thought, well, it's actually my duty to report this and share it widely, not to sit on it just for myself. And for whatever reason, I've just become the go-to guy for communicating all this stuff in the music industry. So another book it is.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure it's just as exciting read and revelationary as all the previous three. Can I ask you this question? Because Driving up and down the country, as both you and I do, to go and do talks and various things, occasionally I'll put on the radio when things are a little bit boring. And there are stations now, it seems, dedicated to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s and the 90s. And some of these stations even have no adverts on it, which is, in some respects, a blooming relief. However, listening to what you've been saying there, clearly the music is still being regurgitated from the past and we're still enjoying it, or a lot of people are enjoying it, not realizing that this social engineering or the messaging is still hypnotically being used to us as we listen to that music. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, because music and popular culture and entertainment are the perfect vehicles to get social engineering and mass mind control done. Because people are off their guard. Nobody's expecting to have their entire value systems shaped and molded for them when they're listening to a favorite piece of music or watching a movie or relaxing with a TV show after a hard day at work. It gets you on a subliminal level, and they employ very clever methods to get inside people's consciousness. So some of it happens on an unseen level in terms of the recordings, particularly with what we were talking about earlier, digital electronic formats. So in the same way that information can be taken out of a digital recording without anyone noticing, so this is what happens with MP3 encoding. So a system, I use iTunes myself, will take a large full format file, a WAV file or an AIF file, and all the information is there. But in order to make the file smaller, so it's more manageable, it can be uploaded and shared easier, it strips out certain information. And the system determines, it's basically AI, determines what information can be taken out without the human noticing, without the human ear recognizing it. And unless you're very vigilant and you know what you're listening for, the recording will sound exactly the same, but a lot of it is gone. So if that can happen without people noticing, then the opposite can be happening as well. So stuff can be getting stripped into recordings without people noticing. Harmful frequencies, harmful energetic vibrations, and all these other techniques that can be used. And that can be affecting people on a particular level. And then you can have very sly, very subtle social engineering going on, where certain ideas are getting pushed through the lyrics. And if you're paying attention, you realize that, hang on a minute, all the groups that are prominent at this time are pushing these same sort of ideas. This is what they were doing in the 60s with sex and drugs and rock and roll. They were normalizing that through rock music, also through movies, which shows you that the movie industry works in tandem with the music industry to push certain ideas. And we're getting that now. Yeah, we're getting that now with the pushing of things like transhumanism, the glorification of AI, particularly in what passes for so-called urban music, R&B, hip-hop, reggae. It's nothing of the sort. It bears no relation to what went before. But you've now got these bloody awful vocal systems. This one called auto-tune.
Oh yes, I've heard of that. Never seen it, but I've heard people talk about it.
Exactly. It makes so-called rappers and so-called singers sound like gibbering robots. And this has been going on for years. And the idea is to enforce to the current generation, they're called Gen Z these days, that electronic ways of doing things are great. Hey kids, listen to how your favorite singer sounds when plugged into a system that makes them into a robot. Isn't it cool? And,
right.
You know, of course, electronic ways of doing things are being pushed to young people generally in absolutely everything. That's why they're all walking around listening to music on phones. So this is an agenda. It's a classic example of an agenda where all the prominent artists in a particular field are on board with the same ideas and the same sounds. And this proves to you, if you're paying attention and if you're prepared to go where the information takes you, that is an agenda. It's not these artists deciding, hey, I think I'm going to plug myself into auto-tune. It sounds really good. First of all, it doesn't. And secondly, if all the artists are doing it, well, have they all had that idea at the same time? Or are they all being instructed to sound this way by those that really control the industry? You know?
Was there a decade that did more damage, do you think, or was more pushy on the messaging that they were doing? I mean, I understand, as you say, that the 60s was pushing rock and roll, and we can all sort of remember 70s, 80s and 90s. And it's funny because somebody said to me, since we got into 2000, just on fashion, you can always recognise if somebody is sort of emulating the 60s, or you watch a film, yeah, that's 60s, that's 70s. But it's much harder in the last 25 years to sort of go, oh, was that before 2010 or after 2010? I don't know whether that's the same musically. But going back to my original question, was there a decade that was really, now looking back, very noticeably pushing big agenda messaging?
I think decades now have become far less definable than they used to. So
Yeah.
for me, the 2000s is just one big sort of homogenized mess. I don't really make too much distinction between 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020. It's all just kind of samey. It's very difficult to identify trends and movements and fads and scenes like you used to. You used to have new romantic and punk and post-punk and new wave and synth pop and all this sort of thing. These days, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old, but it just all sounds the same to me.
But 100 years ago, you say, oh, 20s music, you instantly got an idea in your head
Yeah.
what 20s, 100 years, 30s, 40s, and up the decades. And now suddenly it's like we've got no imagination left. And I wonder
Yeah.
if that's on purpose.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure everything's just been chucked into one big melting pot in the 2000s. As you say, you can mention a decade going back prior to 2000, and they're very definable. So
Yeah.
80s, everyone knows what 80s music sounds like. You could listen to a track in a pub or a restaurant or something, and if it's from the 1980s, you know it's from the 1980s. It's just got that sound about it. And then, 90s, people will think of Britpop, Oasis, Blur, maybe these sort of bands, or grunge, Nirvana, somebody like that, or the drum and bass and the garage music that was around in the 90s. And 70s, 70s rock has a particular sound to it. Everyone knows a 60s track when they hear one. And just thinking about your question there, previously I would probably have highlighted the 1960s as the one that was doing the most damage, if you like, and was employing the most social changes. But thinking about it, I think you'd probably have to go back to the 1950s, because that was laying the foundations for what would come in the 60s. And really, you have to go to 1955, because if you start off in 1950, the music that was around then for the first 5 years of that decade was post-war, and it was very kind of austere and very traditional and very conservative. Pop music hadn't really come in the first part of the 1950s. It all occurred from about 1955 onwards. So you had Bill Haley and his Comets. It used to be Bill Haley and the Comets before the Mandela effect came in and changed all that. These days you won't find any reference to Bill Haley and the Comets. It's his Comets. And so he came in with Rock Around the Clock in 1955. Prior to that, he'd just done Shake, Rattle and Roll in 1954. And I really feel that group was laying the foundations for the emergence of Elvis Presley the following year. So Elvis broke through in 1956 and became an overnight phenomenon. And any group or any artist that becomes an overnight phenomenon is clearly being handled by the social engineers that we have in this world, because there's no way anyone could achieve that under their own steam. So 1956, and then you get other rock and roll artists like Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry and people like this. And by that point, youth culture had changed beyond recognition. So the stuff that Elvis was doing in 1956 would have been shocking a few years before, 1952, 1953.
Now, just going back to the nature of the name of your title of your book, was Elvis's father a plumber or some such, or do you know what his father did?
Not aware that he was a plumber. I know he became Elvis's manager, Vernon Presley. I can't quite pinpoint what he did before that, but I think he was more or less working class from what I gather.
Right, so that's a sort of a genuine young lad, did good, but picked up and then manipulated Elvis from an ordinary family. But going to what you're saying with the sort of bands, I suppose in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were coming from more elite families.
Well, the thing about Elvis Presley is that his career was handled by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Wasn't a real colonel, he was a Dutchman. And he turned up on American shores under very dubious circumstances. He seems to have had quite a shady past. And he becomes a perfect candidate for having been blackmailed or coerced into doing some work for the military intelligence establishments. So he was given the nickname of Colonel, and he was sort of given to Elvis to manage his career, and he was with him throughout his career. And so much of what Elvis was doing was being dictated by this guy, Colonel Tom Parker. So his father, in such circumstances, largely becomes redundant because Parker was dictating the way that Elvis would go and what agendas he would be pushing. So by the time Elvis came along and all these other contemporary rock and roll artists, popular culture had changed beyond all recognition, and the drugs were coming in, amphetamines and uppers. These sort of drugs were very popular at the time, and lewd sort of sexual performances on stage were coming in, which would have been unthinkable just a couple of years earlier.
Yeah.
And this is why I say that the foundations were being laid for what would become later in the 1960s. And a bit of sort of preparatory work was being done in the 1950s. So clearly it had already been decided by then that popular music was going to be used to change youth culture and change attitudes towards all kinds of things. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, family relationships, the youthful generation's place in the world compared to the value system that their parents represented. And the 60s was just kind of continuing that, really. But I think you have to go back to those mid-1950s. And so my research pretty much starts there. I start in 1955, not to say that there wasn't stuff going on before that. Of course there was, but that's not really my bag.
Right,
popular music. So I start in 1955. Somebody else can cover the period before that. Somebody else can do that job.
Someone else can do that. So, I mean, you mentioned that the bands are sort of like with Elvis there are being handled and everything's on a plate. Now, knowing what trying to do your own thing as a writer yourself and myself as a performer and things, if something is given to you on a plate, there comes a point, it certainly seems to me, that you saying, well, it's all very well us doing this, but I want to show myself, my mettle, for what it's worth. And you do get bands, it seems, and this is not my area of expertise by anything. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not very good at music, of course. But when I've heard, having listened to your stuff, and I hear things like, is it Freddie Mercury, I Want to Break Free? And you do wonder, is he talking about I want to break free from the management and all the ways that he's being treated? Or is it just a nice, gentle song about him wanting to break free from a relationship or whatever it is actually about?
Yeah, that song could well be coded. I think it was John Deacon from the band, the bassist, that wrote that particular song. But if we go back to Queen's best-known song, Bohemian Rhapsody,
right,
when you break down the lyrical content in that song, which is the first record I ever bought, by the way, when I was 5, on 7-inch vinyl.
You were 5?
Yeah, I trotted down to
Wow.
Woolworths with my pocket money, and I'd heard this song on Top of the Pops. It was number one for 9 weeks in the winter of 1975, over Christmas 1975. And I used to watch it every week on Top of the Pops with the video, and it scared me to death. It was so creepy. But something about it just appealed to me, and I said to my parents, can I buy this record? And they said, go on then. I think it was 35p or something like that. So
Wow.
down to the local Woolworths it was. And when you do a lyrical breakdown of that song, it really does come across as Freddie talking about a Faustian bargain. So this is the so-called deal with the devil, when artists of all varieties, not just musicians, but painters, sculptors, actors, seem to make some sort of deal with what Bob Dylan once described as the chief commander of this world and of the world we can't see. Those are his words in an interview describing how his career got off the ground. When you look at Bohemian Rhapsody, that's what the song seems to be about. And when you get to the opera section, that's been interpreted as a battle between the forces of good and evil. That's why you've got these angelic sort of choirs.
Right, yes.
One minute they sound menacing, like they're demonic. The next minute they sound sort of more reassuring, like they're angelic choirs. And it's the forces of good and evil battling for Freddie's soul. And in the song, he's telling the story about how he metaphorically just killed a man. He says, Mama, I just killed a man. He's talking about himself, and he's talking about having killed his old persona, his old life. And he's done it in exchange for this engineered career. And I've got a clip that I show in some of my public talks where Freddie is on stage at one of Queen's early gigs. And he says, "Do you like my claws?" And he's got these sort of false nails. And he says, "I was given these by the devil himself." And then he goes,
Blimey.
you don't believe me. They don't believe me," he says. And it's almost as if he's telling you what he's done, that he made a deal in exchange for engineered fame and fortune. And in my books and in my talks, I argue that this is something that actually goes on. And people think it's metaphorical and it's just talking about people making really bad deals with record companies. But as anyone familiar with my content will know, I argue that the industry is run by dark occultists, and they adhere to religious belief systems and rituals and such. And so there's a very real sense in which artists do sell their souls in exchange for these engineered careers. And it can never be worth it because it never ends up well. But
No.
at the time, they seem to think that, oh, this is great. I'm going to have all the wealth and all the prominence and all the women or whatever their preference may be, and yachts and mansions. But the price that you have to pay in exchange for all of that can never be worth it, as many a musician has discovered to their peril.
So a song like Bohemian Rhapsody would presumably have to be approved by the dark forces, whomever, and would know if that was a coded message, do you think? Were artists at some point in their career beginning to regret what they had done, seeing through the veil, as it were, and trying to perhaps put into the music messages to say, help, I need to get out of all of this? And yet at the same time, of course, that's all very obvious to anybody listening to it.
I'm sure that goes on. And if we stay with Queen for a moment, they put out a song which was the B-side to Radio Gaga off their Works album. And they performed this song at Live Aid as well. Queen's performance at Live Aid was absolutely iconic. Most people agree that it was the best performance of that concert. It was the defining moment in Freddie Mercury's career, and it kind of revived Queen for the next few years until Freddie died. But they put out this song called "Is This the World We Created?" It's a very short song. It's acoustic guitar. It's Brian May on the guitar and Freddie doing the vocals. And they're basically mourning the state of the world. And they're saying, look what humanity has done. Look at everything we've destroyed. Look at everything we've squandered. I mean, you come to realise that it's not humanity that does these things. It's the so-called elite ruling class. It's the parasites and the psychopaths that we have that cause all these things. But either way, it's a very deep, reflective song. And it seems to hint at Freddie, who wrote it, having some regrets about things that he was involved with and trying to make amends through putting a song like this out. And another great song that Queen put out was "These Are the Days of Our Lives." And this was released right before Freddie died. If you look at the video to that song, he's basically a dead man walking. He's wasting away. He just looks like a skeleton. And he had a few days to live when that video was made. And he seems to be full of regret, but at the same time it's a beautiful song because it's talking about life and what life is, and we reflect on things and we grow older and we wonder what it's all about, and we hold on to the things that have some value to us. It's a wonderful song. So on the one hand, you have Queen putting out some pretty dodgy songs, because Brian May wrote one called "Tie Your Mother Down," which I talk about in the book. And he's got lyrics in there like, "It's gotta be tonight, my little school babe. I'm burning up inside. Ain't no way I'm going to miss out this time." So It's fairly obvious what he's talking about there.
Yes.
It's a pretty unsubtle song. But then on the flip side of that, you have these beautiful reflective songs. And you find this with most groups. In the canon of most major groups' work, you will find songs that perhaps are pushing social engineering agendas and aren't too clever. But you'll also find the odd melancholic, whimsical, kind of beautifully poetic song. And I do think that the record companies, those that control these assets, allow them to put the odd song out. As long as they, for the most part, push these agendas, every now and again they'll be allowed some artistic freedom to express themselves the way they really want to. It's like a little bonus prize, a little scrap from the table in return for them being good little assets, I feel. I think that's what goes on.
Has any of the big named artists then whistleblowed and told the story, pretty much as you're saying to us, that this is what's happened to me, and have they managed to get their story out? Or if they have, has it been quickly, like we were talking about, all books withdrawn and burned so nobody knows?
Well, there are some examples of artists that have spoken out about stuff that goes on and stuff that they've seen behind the scenes. So a good example from the COVID years was Eric Clapton. So Eric Clapton came out and did an interview for a documentary film where he talked about his regrets over having taken what the Sheep Farm Boys call the arm spears, the 3-dart finish. And he said famously that he lost the use of his hands for a time because they just went numb and he couldn't feel them. And he feared that he would never play the guitar again. And so he spoke about this in this documentary film very candidly, very openly, but that's where it ended. He did this one interview and no more. And I actually tried reaching out to Eric Clapton's management, hoping that he would come on my podcast and do a further interview to talk about this. And it very quickly got shut down by gatekeepers. Van Morrison also spoke out during the COVID era about lockdowns, and he's very critical of what was being done to us and the way our freedoms were being taken away. And I reached out to Van Morrison. I actually managed to get a phone conversation with him. I chatted to him for about 45 minutes or so, and he demonstrated great knowledge of what was going on. He talked about the Who and Klaus Schwab and all them, and he knew exactly who these people were and what these agendas were. And I said to him, would you be prepared to come on record and do a podcast with me talking about all this stuff? And he said, you've got to speak to my management company, they'll sort it all out. So reached out to the management company, gatekeeper steps in, sorry, Van can't do it because of this reason, that reason, he's too busy, whatever, just got shut down. Same thing with Ian Brown, formerly of the Stone Roses. Ian Brown was very outspoken on social media about stuff, so I tried to reach out to him. PR agent, public relations, steps in, sorry, Ian's not doing interviews at the moment, great public relations. How does this guy earn his money? So that's what happens when artists seem to want to speak out and have something to say. A gatekeeper will step in and shut it down. Occasionally you get artists who do manage to get a message out. So an example I give in the new book is Matt Bellamy of the group Muse. Muse had some great songs on one of their previous albums. They had a song called MK Ultra, where they're talking about that CIA-sponsored mind control program. They had a song called Uprising. Matt Bellamy came out some years ago saying he felt that 9/11 was an inside job orchestrated by elements of the American government.
Good heavens.
Exactly. What happens? A short while later, through the NME music paper, Matt Bellamy delivers another interview where he says he was mistaken and he got caught up in conspiracy culture, and now we can see, of course, that it's all nonsense, and he accepts the official version of 9/11 after all. So if you do manage to get a message out, clearly you're very quickly brought back into line. I've also got the example of Roisin Murphy, who is a vocalist with the group Moloko. She made some comments on her own personal Facebook page, not a corporate page, giving her own views on puberty blockers being administered to young people. And she said that she thought it was disgraceful, it was wrong, this should not be happening. She very quickly got cancelled by BBC Six Music, who were due to feature an entire evening of her programmes. So they shut that down and replaced her with a different artist. And then what do you find? A short while later, Roisin Murphy pops up on social media and says that she was mistaken and she apologises. So that seems to be what happens to you if you stray from the path and, dare to express your own views on things. Got some good reminders there. So that's why the messages don't really ever get through. You do occasionally get artists like Shane Lynch, who was in the boy band Boyzone. He came out last year, having become a born-again Christian, and he stated that basically the music industry is demonic, and it's used to push satanic agendas. And he singled out Taylor Swift as an artist who pushes dark occult rituals through her performances. And going back a few years prior to that, you had Brian Harvey of the group East 17, who really seems to have suffered for speaking out about what he was a part of. He said at one point that he was in fear for his life, and he'd had various mental health breakdowns as a result of trying to speak out about the industry. So it seems to be a very risky thing when you do stick your head above the parapet if you have become a household name artist, and that's perhaps makes it understandable why so few of them do it. We get so few examples of those that are prepared to speak out. A heavy price, it seems, has to be paid.
And talking of that heavy price, I mean, I don't know how much one can really say on this, but we have had a number of well-known artists die in strange circumstances, let's say, and they seem to be perfectly normal accidents, or just come to the end of their life, or a health problem, or something that couldn't possibly be any more than that. But every time I hear them, and as I said earlier, it's not my genre really. I've sort of managed to avoid being influenced by any of the sort of pop music. But there was a guy, I forget which band it was, who recently fell off a balcony under strange circumstances. And of course, for me, being somewhat cynical to whatever comes out mainstream news, as I'm sure it is with you and many of the viewers here, will be going, uh-oh, I wonder what was behind that then. Because it does seem that if you're famous and a genuine accident happens, let's say, you can't really take it at face value anymore.
That's right. So that was Liam Payne of the group One Direction.
Oh, he went in one direction.
Well, yeah. He just happened to fall off a balcony, we're told, in a hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in October last year. It's not that he'd been particularly outspoken about the industry and stuff that goes on in it, but he just appears to be someone that had outlived his value to the industry. So One Direction broke up some years ago, and Liam Payne seems to have outlived his usefulness. You can then take it to artists like, for example, Prince, Michael Jackson, and George Michael, all of whom became very outspoken about their respective record labels. So George Michael and Michael Jackson were signed to the Sony Corporation, not necessarily the luckiest record label to be signed to. They had a few things to say about the nature of the contracts that corporation held its artists in, and they were trying to win back some artistic freedom for themselves, some autonomy, and to gain back their master tapes and control over their music publishing and things of this nature. And we all know how it ended up for each of them, if we accept the official versions. And we could take that dynamic all the way back to the 1960s, because the same sort of thing happened with three very prominent soul artists. So we got James Brown, Otis Redding, and Sam Cooke. And round about 1964, these three artists were attempting to unite and come up with their own record label and their own music publishing company, and to break away from their respective music industry homes. And they were just trying to regain some creative autonomy in the same way that Prince and Michael Jackson were a generation later. Didn't end well for any of them, surprise, surprise. So Sam Cooke, in December 1964, got shot to death in a motel when it was claimed that he was trying to sexually molest a young woman that he'd taken back there after a night out at a club. And he was apparently shot by the motel manageress. When this young woman came to the office running for help, Sam Cooke came running after her, and the manageress, in this chaos that ensued, shot Sam Cooke to death, we're told. There's all kinds of anomalies and discrepancies with that story. Why wouldn't there be? And reasons to believe that it's not as clear-cut as people were told it was through the mainstream media. Then, 3 years on from that, in December 1967, Otis Redding died in a plane crash when the light aircraft he was travelling in went down over a lake in Wisconsin. It also killed the soul group the Bar-Kays at the same time. James Brown's fate, it seems, was different. So he was left alive, and he was pretty much forced to perform and be an asset of the industry for the next 30-odd years. And he became what was known as the hardest working man in show business. That was his nickname, but possibly not through choice. So he was doing tours and churning out albums and shows all the way through until his death in December 2006. So all these three artists died in the month of December. And you come to realise that the occult controllers of the music industry do a lot of their stuff according to ritual dates, which are very significant and very important to them. So James Brown died in hospital. He went in for what should have been a routine operation and came out in a body bag. And so that's all three of those artists who had dared to go up against the controllers of the industry machine, and that was their ultimate fate. So it seems that these occurrences are sent out as a possible warning sign for any other artists who might think, oh, we're going to break away from the industry and do things under our own terms, as a little reminder of what might happen to you if you dare to go up against the industry. So, as I said before, there's a line. And once these artists cross that certain line, they are completely owned, completely controlled, and there's no way of ever going back. Many of these artists have thought that they can go back, but they come to discover that there's no way back. And I think when you get to the likes of, for example, the Rolling Stones, Sir Mick Jagger, and the rest of the Stones, you get the surviving Beatles, Sir Paul McCartney, if that's who it really is. That's a different show.
Yes.
Sir Ringo Starr, Sir Elton John, Sir Rod Stewart, Sir Tom Jones, Sir Cliff Richard. When you get to artists of that ilk, is there a trend emerging here? I can't. They know better than to go against their controllers, their paymasters, their overlords. They know to just keep performing. That's why most of them are still out on stage into their 80s, still doing tours, slogging it out on the circuit, because they know you don't go up against these people. You do what you're told, and if you do what you're told, you can get the mansions and the yachts and the women and the drugs, but unfortunately you no longer have a mind or a soul to call your own. And if we think back to 2020 and all the stuff that was getting pushed then, all these assets, all these household names were singing from the same hymn sheet. They were all absolutely on message with the very same stuff that was getting put out there, all the propaganda, not one dissenting voice. Or if there were dissenting voices, they were the ones that we spoke about earlier, Van Morrison, Eric Clapton, and we know what happened to them. They're still alive, but they don't really talk about this stuff anymore.
Closed down. So let's bring it right up to date as we're coming towards the end of the show, as it were. I mean, we talked about how the internet and digital technology has sort of killed the sound of the music in the past and the quality and perhaps the full body of the frequencies and stuff. In theory, and this is what I want to ask you, it's opened up the ability for somebody like my children, let's say, or your children or whoever's children, to be able to put together with a few bits of equipment, quite simply, a drum, a keyboard, and maybe a flute or whatever it is, a hit song, and with the power of the internet, have it round and it becomes a success. Has that threatened the dark forces who's controlled the industry up until this point? And is it liberating, or do you think that still all of that is very much under their manipulation and control?
There are levels to everything, so it's a hierarchy. And when you get to the realm of the people like Beatles and Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, obviously they're top league, and everything is going to be done on the record company's terms. They'll be allowed some artistic creative freedom, as I said, and to put out some songs that they feel to put out. But if you go several levels down in the hierarchy, you find entry level and mid level. Like I said, there's a point, there's a line. Once you cross the line, you're owned. If you stay below the line, you might be able to carve out a decent career for yourself. And this is a good sort of parting message for any budding, aspiring musicians or producers or DJs. Because you can now produce music relatively cheaply and simply on your own terms, you might be able to get a song out there and it will be relatively organic. It might flourish on its own without any input from these major corporations. And that might be enough to enable somebody to make a decent career for themselves, have enough money coming in to pay the bills and get reinvested into making future music. And they might be able to play gigs and have a relatively decent career. My advice is always to any artist or any bands, just become wary of any offer that you might get made that feels too good to be true. Some advice my old dad used to give to me was, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if somebody's offering you the world, it's going to come at a price. Nobody offers you the world and doesn't want anything back for it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. So you're going to know the offer when it comes, because the industry employs spotters, and it's their job to turn up at gigs and keep an eye on which artists are creating a little bit of a buzz, a little bit of a stir under their own steam. And they'll report back to their corporate overlords and say, yeah, I saw this great band, I think they've got a really good sound and they're very creative. And that's when the record company might reach out to this band and say, hey, come in for a meeting. We think that you could be of some use to us and we could really help your career to skyrocket. Be very wary of that kind of offer when it comes in. But if you could fly below the radar and just kind of bubble along under your own steam, then you could have a very fulfilling career for yourself. You're not going to become megastars, you're not going to become millionaires, but if it's enough for you to just be creative and be authentic and not sell out, and you get fulfillment and satisfaction from putting out certain messages, then these days you can carve out a pretty decent career for yourself, I feel. You and I both do a lot of festivals in the summer, and we see many of these bands and many of these artists who make authentic truth music, conscious message music, and they're not signed to any of these major corporations. They do it all under their own steam. And I'm sure if we speak to many of these people, they will say that they're very happy with the way that they put out their music. They're very happy with the way their career has turned out. And there's no reason why many more artists and bands couldn't be doing it on that kind of basis. I've got a conscious message music showcase, which I call the Sound of Freedom, which I've been running since 2013. And it's my way of showcasing artists who are not necessarily signed to major record corporations, but who have something really good to say and put out great music. And it's like a one-stop shop for putting all that stuff out there. And more artists are just kind of stepping up and doing things under their own energy, without wanting to be beholden to one of these corporations. That's the way I do my books. I self-publish my books. I mean, I put them on Amazon, but I've not gone through any conventional publisher. I don't have a literary agent, because the minute you sign up to a literary agent, they're going to want to try and control over what you put out. Yeah, they'll be like, I don't think you should say this and take that out and maybe put this in. I don't want that kind of control. I want to say whatever I want to say in my books, and I do. And if I can achieve that through my books, then artists can achieve it through their albums. And it's a great way to go. And if there is a benefit to everything going digital and electronic, it is that it brings a high level of autonomous ability for us creative types to put out a message on exactly the terms we want it to be on, without corporate manipulation. You didn't used to be able to put out an album without signing to one of the major record companies, but you can now, and you can do the same with books.
And the interesting thing about the sort of the digital world and the little golf balls that we all end in, or the goldfish bowls, the sort of what do you call it when you're in I can't remember the term now. When they say, oh, you're just talking to yourself, or you're talking to your
echo
same
chamber.
audience. Echo chamber. Thank you. When you're in that sort of echo chamber. But if your audience is there, and you've got a book, or you've got a music album, and they stay with you, and you've built up your followers, let's say, that's really good. And the nice thing, and I've had a sample of this. Somebody said to me at an event, they said, Richard, what's it like to be famous? And I said, what do you mean? When I'm famous, I'll tell you. They said, but you are famous. I said, but I'm only famous to you because you watch my videos. Thank God I'm not famous to everybody else, because how awful would that be, walking down the street to go and buy a bag of potatoes and everybody's on your case. When we go to these, and you'll go to one of these truth events or these festivals, and suddenly everybody wants to talk to you, which is lovely. But when you're out there in the main real world, it's nice to have that anonymity, just to go and be like everyone else. And if you do become too famous and you can't cope with that, and everybody's on your case, and you've got to have bodyguards, and I just cannot think how awful your life must be when you just cannot nip down the pub and have a discreet pint.
Well, exactly. And it's probably the same for you as it is for me these days. You go to one of these festivals or these conferences, and it can literally take you half an hour to get from one side of the room to the other just to go to the toilet. Because everyone's like, oh, Richard, I saw your video, and let me tell you this. Or people are lovely, they bring you gifts, and it's really nice of them, but they'll say, oh, here's a bar of soap that I cooked up, and I'd like you to have it. And here's a pot of jam that I made. And it's really nice of people, but it just takes you ages to get anywhere. And that's at our level, and we're not famous, as you say.
Exactly.
We're well known within a particular very, very small...
very tiny niche.
Yeah, exactly. But imagine somebody like Mick Jagger. He can't go down the local co-op for a sandwich. He just can't do it. And I'm sure
because you've got the paparazzi as well following you, and and you've seen these pictures where they say, "Oh, there's Mick Jagger going in. Look, doesn't he look miserable? His life must be, down." And he's just like, "I've just got up. I've just got up."
And you get scrutinised. They're like, "Oh, look, he's wearing his tracksuit bottoms, and what a mess his hair is." Or with women, "Oh, no makeup. Look at the state of her hair." And maybe you don't want that. You don't want to be scrutinised like that when you just walk down the street. So I'm sure the price of fame for many of these artists is an absolute nightmare, because their lives are no longer their own.
But kids, it's interesting, kids these days, what do you want to do when you grow up? That sort of eternal question. They say, oh, I want to be famous, or I want to be a social media influencer, or one of these things. And you just think, my God, you have no idea.
Exactly. And this is a sort of Cinderella fairy story that's peddled particularly to young girls. Like, you could be the next Rihanna, you could be the next Beyonce. All you've got to do is want it hard enough. Yeah. And these young girls...
And sign on the dotted line.
It sounds great to them. You could be the next Taylor Swift, and it sounds like all their dreams coming true at the same time. And wouldn't it be so marvellous if they could achieve that? And I'm sure that's how they lure many of these assets in. Promise them the world and promise them all this fame and fortune and prominence and stuff. And I'm sure so many of them, when they actually make it, wish that they hadn't. I'm sure there are so many pop princesses.
We're coming to the end. The
reality of the situation is, if you want to be successful as an author, you have to go on Amazon. You just have to. It's the best way of getting books out. I mean, even if you didn't want to go through Amazon, it becomes the only reliable method of getting books out in other parts of the world. So I've tried, many areas of the world is just get it from Amazon. It's the best way.
The town that wouldn't comply, it's to do in there.
Books in an audio format.
Off the shelf and read one page when it's your own, because is there going to be another one?
I said that after the last one, that there wasn't this one out, is because the information I don't.
You've got to sit there and write the blooming thing. Mark Devlin, all the links will be in the description, of course. Do check out those books and get a nice signed one, because it's always lovely. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. And fascinating conversations as ever. Looking forward to seeing you at some of the events. I'm sure we will. Boogieing along.
Yep.
Until next time, thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests. Look after yourself, and happy reading this summer. Till next time, goodbye.
Cheers. Questions, but very few answers.
Right, yes.
And I find you get a lot of researchers that deal with hard conspiracy fact. So they're very 3D physical reality.
Yes.
And they know all the nuts and bolts of how the control system works, and they're very good at that. And then you get other people who ignore all that stuff. They say it's too dark, it's too negative, I don't want to go there, I want to keep my vibration high. And they're more sort of new agey in their thoughts and their behaviours. And I feel that both sides are kind of missing the point. Because, yes, all this conspiracy stuff clearly goes on, but there are spiritual components to it. And if you don't accept that and you're not prepared to go there, you're missing a big part of the picture. And then if you're more spiritually inclined and you ignore all the dark information, you're not really being of any great use, because you're just ignoring it and not opposing it in any way or putting obstacles in its path.
Yes.
So you have to accept that there's both components going on.
No, I totally agree. And then actually, when you start to think, even if you just start to think about who you are and what this is, it makes you take an inward look as opposed to an outward look. Right. And one of the comments actually that I made when I was at Hope doing the questions and answers at the end of my talk is people were talking about all the different things outside of you, the Shungite stuff, geology stuff, dowsing, the common law and all that. And I said, that's, yes, but that's all outside of you. That's still in a 3D world that you're using. Ultimately, to me, it seems to come back to consciousness. And everything else, and I said to the audience, I said, for all I know, you're just a hologram. I can't actually say you're here. I mean, you appear to be here. I can touch you, but then if everything is vibration and resonance and energy, then how do I know that I'm being duped?
Right. Clearly, everything that we experience is energy, vibration, and frequency. Going back to that famous quote by Nikola Tesla, who said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of frequency, energy, and vibration. And it is that. So we perceive this world to be physical, but actually it seems it's our consciousness decoding our experiences that makes us believe that it's physical.
Yes.
Which is a very complicated concept to get your mind around when you first come across it. But I first did about 15 years ago, so I've had plenty of time
to think about it.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing now from so many researchers is that we're living in some sort of 3D, some sort of CGI-like simulation.
Right.
Like virtual reality simulation.
And don't you find it interesting that we have computer games now, and it's now there's a lot of people talking about the same thing,
right.
That the parallel is there for us almost to realise that we're in this 3D simulation that kids can't get out of, and we can't get out of, but we're in a
simulation within a simulation.
Exactly, yeah. I just find the irony of that quite fascinating.
Yeah. I first came across this idea a few months ago. A lot of people were talking about, we're living in a simulation. And I didn't really comprehend it at the time.
Right.
I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I think you have to arrive at these ideas when you're ready.
Yes.
And people arrive at it at different points. So many people were talking about this stuff a few months ago, and I wasn't there yet at that point.
Right.
But at the start of this year, around about January, I started really taking an interest in this stuff. And it's changed my perception of what this place is. So I think it is still energy, frequency, and vibration, but it could also be like computer code. So the reason we get things like synchronicities, and you get people, experiences, places that all sort of converge together, and we think, well, this is amazing, this is the forces of the universe, could be down to that we're living in some sort of computer-coded reality. And so it's the data that's kind of attracting to itself.
Oh, right, yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, well, I'm starting to think of it in those terms now.
Right. And is that... Do you think that you're influenced that way because of your background in using media or music media and mixing stuff, because you've mixed things together and all of that? Is there an element of that's helping you interpret that way?
Not really, because I'm someone who has a very non-technical mind. I'm actually the least technical DJ you'll ever meet. I know just enough to be able to record a set and do a radio show and stuff, but I don't understand how it all works. And when I first started, I was all about analog technology.
Yes.
So I started playing vinyl records before I graduated to CDs. I used to use these things, the old analog reel-to-reel tape machines. Fantastic. So I started in a radio station in 1990, editing with this stuff and using razor blades and splicing bits of tape out and putting them back in and putting the reels on backwards.
I love that. I love that. It's like, to me, it's real.
Yeah,
I had
it's
one of these
hands-on.
EMI blocks with, as you say, a razor blade, quarter-inch tape with a bit of leader that you would... brilliant. I love it. Where tapes come off.
And just being prepared to go all the way.
So when you say that, do you mean, the synchronicities, going back to how things like is it like in a computer game where sometimes you can find the edge of rolling on the floor, but it's going to carry on and you just have to sort it out afterwards in a live event?
In answer to your question, it's not that I dealt with a lot of digital technology that has caused my mind to go down that route.
Yes.
It's just information that I've come across more recently. And just being prepared to go all the way.
So when you say that, do you mean, the synchronicities, going back to how things like is it like in a computer game where sometimes you can find the edge of the programmed game and you either can't quite go in it or it throws you out a bit and there's glitches? I'm not a gamer, so...
Well, I'm not either. I've never played computer games, so I'm not familiar with them.
Right.
But I'm hearing from people that do game a lot about things like NPCs, this concept of non-player characters.
Non-playing characters.
Apparently that's a feature of video games.
So what do you think then, in terms of the great outdoors?
Yeah, well, something's got to explain why some of us are prepared to ask big questions and engage our consciousness in thinking about things that actually matter.
Yes.
But the majority of people out there seemingly don't.
And I've made that point in a recent video, how people are so in the material world that they're almost in and of it, and there's almost nothing, no spiritual oomph in there. Maybe it's to be awakened, of course, and one would hope that would be the case.
Well, yeah, if it's not been by now, I don't know what it's going to take.
No.
But I can go into a pub or a cafe or something, and I just see people engaging in light, everyday conversation, talking about football or TV or shopping or whatever it is, and they seem perfectly happy.
Yes.
They're happy, they've got smiles on their faces, and to them that's life, that's what life consists of. It's never occurred to them that there could be anything more to it. I used to be in that mind state myself. I have to remind myself that going back 20 years, I was a full-time DJ, And the only things that mattered to me were parties, tunes, clubs. That was it. That was
Did
my
you,
life.
when you were younger, I mean, I remember when I was younger, I was interested. My dad had some of these esoteric books, a few yogi books, and the things about the inner state. And I did try to read them, and I found it very difficult to quite comprehend what he meant. But I always felt that there was nothing for me in organised religion. I was never feeling that was anything. And then some of this esoteric, the sort of meditation stuff, and is there a soul? I felt that there was something in it, but I couldn't really place it. And then, of course, work, marriage, children, all those things, life, the general things, they take over, and then you've kind of removed about it. But then all of this has brought it back with such rapidity, and of course through lots of different people that I would never have the opportunity to have met. Have taught us stuff. So when you were young, did you feel any connection to anything spiritual?
I did. I've been through many different phases. So I didn't come from a religious family, but I went to a Church of England school.
Right.
So they taught us about Jesus and God and the Bible, and we used to go to church at certain times of the year. So I was familiar with the concept of Christianity.
Yeah.
And then that kind of got dissipated, and didn't really think much about it. Then when I was 20 years old, I underwent a sort of spiritual transformation, I guess. I started to feel differently about the world. This was 1990. And it's right about the time that David Icke says that he started to get the truth vibrations coming in. You know,
okay.
I think I was tapping into something at that time, the exact same time, but I didn't know what it was or what to do with it. So I allowed myself to be coerced into a Christian church, an evangelical church. And I went there for the following 4 years. And I emerged from it a bitter atheist because of some of the things that I'd seen there.
Yes.
So a lot of hypocrisy among the church members and the elders particularly. And it just left me feeling very disillusioned with the whole thing. And it turned me into an atheist. And I was an atheist for the next 12, 13 years.
Yes.
And then around about 2007, I started to feel differently about the world again. And I came to realise that, of course, there's a creative force behind all this. I mean, we're here. It's self-evident.
Yeah.
Something created us and all of this.
Yeah.
So there must be some kind of what people would call God. And that started me searching. I went on a spiritual journey. I was looking for the answers. I guess I got coerced into a sort of new age way of thinking. And it's only more recently that I've started to question that again, and I've moved on to another phase.
Yes.
But my dad was quite instrumental in getting me started in all that as well. Big shout out to my dad. He watches your channel.
Oh, does he?
He does, yeah.
What's his name?
Dave.
Hello, Dave.
He's a big fan.
Thanks very much. Very kind of you.
So he used to have a load of crazy books around the house. He read Eric von Daniken.
Oh, yes.
Chariots
of
of
the Gods. Yes, yeah.
He had a book by Lobsang Rampa, Caves of the Ancients.
Oh, I've heard of the book, but not the name, yes.
And these books were lying around the house.
Yes.
So he's always been a deep thinker. As my mum will contest, you know, sits there in the armchair staring into space and thinking deeply about stuff, driving her crazy. But he got me into the books of David Icke,
Right.
and that's really what kick-started my truth-seeking journey.
Yes. So books like Chariots of the Gods, which was hugely laughed at, wasn't it? I mean, it came out, people took it fairly seriously, and then they said, no, it's a joke, he's made it all up. And he
They tried to commit him to a lunatic asylum.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they said he was crazy.
And you know, you're allowed to come up with a theory, even if it's crazy, without having to go into a lunatic asylum. I would have.
Well,
thought
this was
that.
the late 60s. I guess the culture was a bit different then.
Right, but these days, any alternative thought is not permitted, is it?
Well, seemingly not.
So,
no.
so it would seem. But with that suggestion of spacemen and spaceships and all of this, and now, I mean, this is where I'm hearing and reading and seeing the alternative history. And you didn't really see much in my front room, but there's books everywhere, and there's a load of history books. And so I've been very much fascinated and brought up on conventional history, only to start to realise that it's all a pack of lies.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, but at least
We've all been there.
yeah, absolutely. But at least at least you've got something to say. Okay, I can understand the narrative that they've said. Now let's go back and see what really happened and what bits are true and what bits are not, and where's the spin. And of course, we've all been brought up on mainstream media, which we now understand how spin works. So I can go back and look at these books and see how spin works on history, or what events are complete fabrication. And if you don't have any history, I suppose if you're working on a blank canvas, it's very easy. You know, you can just say to kids, this is what we know at the moment, and it's the accepted theory. And people like von Daniken and his cave paintings with potential aliens and things in it is more likely. What's your thoughts on our alternative history?
Well, again, I'm coming around to new ways of thinking about that. I did a great interview the other day with Howdy McCoskey. Deep guy, heavy guy. We spoke for about 2 hours.
Blimey.
And he is a Canadian researcher. He lives in Norway. And it was a mind-blowing conversation. It actually reminds me of when I first started reading David Icke about 15 years ago. And it completely changed my worldview. It was a paradigm shift. Everything seemed different. And this chat that I had with him the other day was a paradigm shift of the same scale.
Wow.
It really altered my entire perception of everything. So he talks about alternative history. And his contention is that we've been lied to about everything. Particularly, official accounts of history.
Yes.
He talks about the world's fairs. Have you come across
The World's Fairs?
late 1800s.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think I've got a book. I think I've got a book on downstairs.
Right. These expositions that popped up in various parts of the world at huge expense, massive scales, and they were basically indoctrination centres for influencers in society. This is what he says. So those that would be teachers, lecturers that would teach history to others were being indoctrinated with propaganda at these world's fairs.
And these are about 1850, something like that, is it?
It was the Victorian era, so late 1800s, going into the very early 1900s.
Right, okay.
And that's connected to this concept of orphan trains. He says that there were these trains with all these kids that were just coming from who knows where, and they were the next generation that was going to be taught this skewed version of history of where we come from and what this place is. And so they would believe this because it's all they've ever known. And so this false version of history would get carried on through generations. So he talks about that. Tartaria and mud floods, that's another one. It's all connected.
Yes.
And also he goes much deeper and talks about what the concept of God is and this reality. And can we really assume that what we think of as God is a benevolent being that wants the best for us? Or does all the evidence that we can see with our own eyes and test with our own experiences suggest that God may not be a benevolent entity, or at least whatever force currently controls this realm?
Well, I mean, just on that God thing, if God, I mean, see, when I was younger, I used to think if God is, it means there'll be part of God thing that we're all...
An old guy with a flowing white beard sitting on a cloud. It's probably not a he or a she, it's a force.
It's a trend, isn't it? It's a trend got these days.
These days he's probably got rainbow hair.
Yes.
Yeah. But I see it as a force, and I'm questioning whether the original God of creation had creation stolen from him, by some lesser sort of demonic being. So when you get into the works of the Gnostics and the Cathars and these sort of groups, they spoke about these entities known as the demiurge, and it was like a fallen angel, if you like, the concept of Lucifer, who, according to their teachings and according to these belief systems, somehow hijacked the original creation and created a sort of bastardized copy of it, which is consistent with this idea of a sort of virtual reality simulation.
Right.
So this isn't original creation according to that thought system. It's a version of it, a lesser version of it, and they ask for good things to happen. They ask for joy, happiness, abundance, for war to end, for suffering to cease. And what happens?
Not a blind bit of difference.
Exactly, the suffering continues.
Yes.
And I also had a great conversation the other week with Eric Dubay, and we were talking about similar subjects. And he said that we're told that we live in a world of duality, where to have good, you have to have evil; to have up, you have to have down; to have male, you have to have female.
Yeah.
Everything has an opposing value,
So above,
an opposing
so
force.
below, type thing.
And that made sense to me for many years. But he made the point that it's not actually balanced, is it? There's way more suffering than there is joy, particularly when you get into some of these dark subject areas that I look at, mind control and satanic ritual abuse and stuff. And Eric said, imagine a minute of the most pleasurable experience you could ever have in your life, whatever that choice may be for you.
Right.
Would you trade that minute of exquisite pleasure for a minute of the most excruciating torture that a human could ever undergo?
Yeah.
And nobody in their right mind would do it.
No.
So there's no real balance there. Things are skewed on the side of pain, suffering, death. And I know these are very dark and horrific subjects for people to consider. It's not happy, but there is some positivity in it.
Where is where?
You have to look hard for it. Yeah, you have to look hard for it. In the chat with Howdy, he was saying that this place is unfortunately geared towards pain, suffering, and all the rest of it. And we just have to do our best to navigate our way through it.
Right.
So we have to look after ourselves, do the best we can for ourselves, look after our loved ones and those close to us, and try to reduce suffering. So do no harm. Don't think that, I might as well just behave however I want, because then you're just adding to the suffering. So observe the tenet that do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself, and seek to do no harm, but don't think you can fix this place. This is a mistake that I used to make. I used to think, if enough of us do everything we can turn this place into a world of love and abundance and peace and joy. And I don't think we can, because I don't think it's set up for that. The best we can do is navigate our way through it as positively as we can, accept it for what it is, and try and help others, try and do the best we can. I've actually found that since looking at these subjects, even though they're quite dark, I feel that it's made me more compassionate and empathetic and, dare I say it, a better person. I think I care more about others since I've looked at this stuff.
I suppose if you were saying that this is God's creation, why would there be any problems or anything? And how boring it would be if everything was just absolutely fantastic, if you didn't have conflict somewhere. And I mean, sometimes I get a bit irrational with it, because sometimes, you bash your arm on a door frame and you go, was that meant, even the tiny thing, was that just a simple, like, is that supposed to tell me something, that I did something wrong somewhere, So it would be very, and you think of the sort of, what it's like, you take, if we were
of any period in recorded human history where there hasn't been conflict or war or turmoil or chaos.
Yes.
So if we really did live in a world of balance where you could have one thing or the other, do you not think there would have been a period at some point
it's
where
true.
there was peace everywhere?
I mean,
we've never had that.
I've heard of groups that have, even fairly recently, in the last harmonious...
Say, yes, that's the way I want to live.
Yes.
People would say, no, I want to be left alone. I want to live freely, do no harm. Isn't that what most people want? It's what I want. I just want to be left alone, to do what I want to do. I won't harm anyone. But we don't get that.
So is this the lesson that we're here to learn? I mean, if you didn't have conflict, if you didn't bash your learn...
In these shows. And that's really motivated people towards action, particularly in places like Australia, which I visited a few months ago. So many people are just burning with a passion and a fire because now they realise they've been lied to their whole lives.
Yes.
So there's value in conflict and turmoil, certainly. But another thing which I wonder about, it's another big question that I've been asking. And again, they're just questions. I don't have the answers. I would like the answers.
Yeah.
But a point which has come up in all the conversations I've had about this is consider the natural world, the food chain.
Yeah.
Every day, billions of living sentient beings murder other living sentient beings just to be able to survive for food.
Yes. You don't have that. I mean, you have some vegetarian animals, but you have a lot of animals that aren't vegetarians.
Most of them aren't. Yeah. So every day you have this bloodbath going on in the natural world.
Yeah.
My question is, why couldn't a god, a creative force, have come up with a creation where that's not necessary? Just imagine all the fear and all the pain that all these animals experience. I made the point again in that interview with Howdy. He said he lives in Norway, and there's a lot of wild deer around where he lives. And he says he looks at these deer, and they're grazing in the field, and every now and again they look up and look around to make sure a predator isn't about to attack them. And I said, I used to have pet rabbits, and we put the rabbits out in the garden. They'd always been pets. They'd never experienced a predator in the wild. But you look in their eyes, and it's just fear, pure fear. These creatures live their lives in fear. So what kind of loving, benevolent God would want creatures to live their entire lives in fear and then get torn to shreds by some predator? That doesn't seem to me like the domain of a loving God that wants the best for us.
Right. So, okay. What do you think then, is there a life after death? Is there another phase that we go to that might be answering these questions or taking us into, a different realm that might be nobody gets killed, nobody dies, and you put up with this for a long time, and you might end up going, hang on a minute, okay, and then is there another phase that we're going through? Are we on some sort of spiritual journey? Does what happen here happen anywhere else, or are we like Richard Dawkins? When you're dead, that's it. Thanks very much.
I actually find that idea quite comforting, which will shock a lot of people. I mean, I don't agree with Dawkins. I don't agree that when you die, that's it, you know nothing. But I would quite like that to be the case because I don't ever want to come back to this place. Once is enough, if it is just once.
Yes, because I think with the Dawkins approach, you've always got the back door, haven't you? You can always go, actually, it's too hot now. I don't like this. Whatever it is,
I'm out of here.
I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But we're all told, well, if you take your own life,
then you have to come back and do it all over again. Yeah. I mean, I just wonder how much of this is psyops, mind control, because I specialise in that. I mean, if we've got an evil, malevolent control system that wants pain and suffering, and the idea is that we emit louche energy.
Right.
That's the term. So when we're stressed and when we're fearful and we emit all that low density sort of negative energy, anxiety and all the rest of it, it forms a kind of food source for these entities that live out of sight. This is an idea that I'm coming across. And so this world is set up to cultivate louche energy. That's why we're always stressed, we're always worried about stuff.
Right.
And so if that wasn't there, then it would be a very different place.
Do you think we're still too embryonic on this realm, in as much as give it another 100,000 years that we think, okay, we picked up a point
Middle of the movie,
yeah,
and we don't know how it ends yet. To use that as an analogy.
So we're only basing what we know on what's occurred,
what we currently experience. We don't really know what's gone before because we've been lied to about it, and we don't know what's to come.
Yes.
So we just have to do our best to create a future that is going to be worth living for future generations, particularly our own offspring. But it's not looking great in terms of the way society is headed, with this digital control grid and AI taking over.
Yes.
And they're trying to plug us into this Agenda 2030 New World Order, sort of futuristic social credit system, 5G, smart grid, Internet of Things. Things are hurtling in that direction very quickly, and it's going to take a lot to stop it.
But that's almost like the end goal, isn't it? Oops, the studio. I know that plug or us. But if we've come in on that DVD halfway through, I mean, in a way, it's like saying, say you've got a colony of ants, and someone's gone and poured boiling water on it, and they're all in disarray for a long time, and we've come in just after the boiling water's been poured, and so everything's in disarray, and no one can remember as an ant when the colony was perfectly functioning.
Right.
And so everything's in disarray, and we're in this disarray moment. But in time, that colony of ants and the water and the deaths of some of the ants and the injuries will be a memory, and they'll be going back to normal until someone else pours boiling water on them. And it may be that in our journey that we're here with all of this nonsense, and it feels like, the computerization of us, the transhumanization, is part of that sort of boiling water and what have you. But actually, we will survive all of this, and then we may be in the harmony, but we just never remembered the harmony because we weren't there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the reason we've had all these futuristic dystopian nightmare movies depicting that kind of society, because that's where they want to take us.
Yes.
And they've been trying to condition people to accept that this is what the future is going to look like. But it's not a done deal.
No.
And I like to think there will be a line in the sand where people will say, hang on a minute, I'm not having this. And maybe that will involve children. If they're trying to put chips in children and they say, we want to put your child up to the Internet of Things or whatever, I really hope that parents at that point would say, not over my dead body, mate, that's not happening. To answer your earlier question, I do feel that there is something beyond this life. We are created. We're here, whatever this place is.
Yes.
So there's got to be something beyond it. And I'm just asking these questions. And what's incredible to me is how much I'm being attacked for answering the questions. I'm being trolled.
Right.
I seem to have pissed off a lot of Christians. Not that I've set out to do that.
No, I get
But
similar things if I go anywhere near this subject.
Yeah. They get very upset. And it's just Christians. I don't get pissed off Jews, pissed off Hindus, pissed off Muslims.
No, that's very interesting, isn't it?
I've never had an angry Muslim email me and say, "How dare you?
No.
Heretic."
Heretic. That is very interesting. Do you get, just as a matter of interest, I get, and again, I'm aware that the sorts of people may well be watching at this precise moment, but I get a lot of what I would call cherry-picked sections from the Bible that will back up a position that they want to take. So they might say,
right,
such and such and such and such, and then there'll be some quotes from various things. And I think, what's the point in quoting several bits from the Bible? Because probably if I knew my Bible backwards, I could quote things back to them which took their argument apart. So when I get those, I do think, okay, that's your point of view. And of course, you're very, let me just say this, you're entitled to your point of view, and I'm not trying to knock your point of view or anything. It's just, I don't have to accept it.
Right. Yeah, everyone's got an opinion. They say opinions are like a-holes, don't they? Everyone's got one.
Everyone's got one.
Yeah. And isn't that the case?
Yeah. Which makes conversation interesting.
Well, it does, yeah.
Unless
it leads to arguments as well.
Well, I know, but I mean, once you fall into
block buttons.
Yes. And
yeah,
if you fall
into the block button a fair bit lately.
Into name calling, it's no longer an argument, is it? It's exactly. Fallen apart. But by argument, I mean debate, that kind of argument. Where
I don't mind debate as long as it's polite and respectful.
Yes,
and it's an exchange of viewpoints.
Yes.
And I've had a fair bit of that.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, like I was saying earlier, whatever field of research you enter this realm in, whether it's questioning alternative history, whether it's looking at the music industry, if you're going to go all the way,
yes,
and you're an open-minded critical thinker with no belief system to prop up, no ulterior motives, and you're not on some payroll, then you're going to arrive at this point where you ask these questions. You know, what is this place? What created it? What are we doing here? What's the point of it all?
And do you find that, just as a matter of interest here, from one YouTuber to another, is if you change your mind or your stance starts to deviate from something that you'd said previously, the audience don't like that.
They don't.
And I mean, you see it with politicians, U-turning. When you change
this one out, the first musical theme idea, when I first started out, I've got 15,000 words on it in a chapter in that book. Oh, okay. I can't say for definite that the original one died, and it appears that we get this both before and after 1966. So I reached a point then where I wasn't so convinced that the original McCartney had necessarily died in 1966, but I definitely accepted there were two of them. They've used doubles. And when I first started to present this, a lot of people got very upset because I'd changed my mind.
Yes.
And they were like, "But you said this before." And I'm like, "Yes, but I hadn't seen these photographs by that point.
Right.
And now I've got these questions." And you're right, people don't like it when you change your standpoint. But for me, that is the sign of a genuine truth seeker who is on a path of discovery, and they're learning as they go. It's just that with guys like us, we're doing it very publicly.
Yes.
People see us learning.
Yes, and they see us changing our minds and readjusting ourselves, and we still may not be right. That's the thing.
We're not claiming we're right.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So just as a matter of interest, I mean, I've heard the story about the fact that he died, Paul McCartney, and that there was a double. Because music, is not really, or popular music has never been my real thing. I sort of went, oh, that's interesting, and because I'd heard it within the last 2 years, of which my mind has now been much more open. I mean, that's the trouble. Now you could suggest anything to me, and it could be a complete load of twaddle, and I'll go, I won't discount it.
Right.
Just in case you've got a point. Whereas before I would have gone, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course there is. So now I'm thinking, well, okay, that's interesting. There's two of them. At what point were they twins? Were they? One was just never interested in the music industry. I'm just going through all the sort of machinations that you might have.
Right.
And then, was there a point where the band got to prominence, or we need a double on that in case we want him somewhere else, or was there a nefarious reason, or was the band I don't know anything about really the Beatles, so that's what I'm going through. So what's the theory, just briefly then?
There are many schools of thought. There's a researcher by the name of Miles Mathis who claims that Paul McCartney was one of twins, but there's not a lot of evidence to support that one. Certainly the Beatles stopped touring in late August of 1966. We know this to be the case. They played their last gig in Candlestick Park, San Francisco on the 29th of August 1966, and the date that's given for the switch, or the death of McCartney according to the conspiracy theory, is September 11th of 1966, which was a few days after the Beatles stopped touring for good. So something's got to explain why they ceased touring at that point.
Yes. Wasn't that they'd fallen out and they just were bored of it?
They said, which is pretty unconvincing, that they'd reached a point where there were so many screaming girls in the audience that they could no longer hear themselves play their instruments.
Oh, okay.
So there was no point in them touring anymore because things had just got out of hand.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to become a studio band, just concentrate on albums, which is what they did from that point on.
Right.
There are all kinds of occult ritualistic reasons why McCartney may have been replaced. There's a book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which came out in 2009. There have been many different versions of it, and it purports to be the tell-all autobiography of the guy that took on the role of Paul McCartney when the original one died.
Right.
That's the claim that's made in the book.
Right.
It's presented as historical fiction. They have to do it that way.
Right.
They have to call it fiction, because if they didn't, they'd be up to their eyes in legal cases. And it claims to be Billy Shears, William Shepherd, this Scots guy who took on the role of Paul McCartney. He's known as Billy Shears, which is why you get in the song on the Sgt. Pepper album, "May I introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears." That was 1967, and that was supposed to be the public's first introduction to the new guy that's now going to be playing the role of McCartney. So all along, according to the theories, they were telling you.
Yes.
They were telling you cryptically, in coded form, symbolic form, because that's what these occultists do. The music industry, along with all other strata of society, is run by dark occultists.
Yes.
Unfortunately. Wish I had some better news for you,
Yeah.
but that's the case. And they do their rituals, they like their symbolism, and they have these tenets whereby they feel they have to tell you what they're doing. But they never come right out and say it in no uncertain terms. They cloak and veil it in allegory and symbolism, but the clues are always there if you know where to look.
Yes, and it certainly makes a bit of fun going back to old films or old music or hunting these things out. It's like little Easter eggs.
Yeah, well, it can destroy your life and
well, I suppose
destroy your family.
I guess because I've not been into popular culture, in a lot of popular culture and modern films and music, it hasn't affected me. People can say that they're all occultists and all of that, and you go,
Who's that now? David Bowie? Who's he?
I could not tell you. I a company for a lot of people compromised by, I think his name was
Coloured Swap Shop, BBC. That was a cheap. Everyone else on Tiz was, and there used to be this angler called Terry Thomas.
Oh, right.
And he used to be featured on the show.
Yes.
But, shout out to anyone that remembers Tiz was. That was quality TV.
And if anybody remembers, do you remember a program much later, Motormouth, from TVS?
Oh, right.
And especially on one of them,
which was crap.
Yeah. The
self-published because you have to.
Because in a way, it's a fairy tale job. The eggshells a bit to make it amazing people.
What this place is, I'm kind of wondering whether that's still valid, but something has to explain why we're doing these jobs, and we had all this grounding, all this training in our previous careers, and it's brought us to what we're doing now. We're doing our shows, and we're drawing on skills and experiences that we've had.
Absolutely,
and it all seems to be quite meaningful. In that
yes, at the time, I mean, I remember trying to sort of persuade people that I had some interesting ideas, and I was working.
If they had hired me,
I had a similar experience. I was moved to the.
No turning back.
No, a very lucky escape. And unfortunately, we have to escape now. I like to keep these to about an hour. We've just gone over.
Sure.
A fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
And I know you had a huge amount of effort to get here from where you were earlier today. With
the A27 was no fun. Yeah.
No, it isn't a great road at the moment with all the stuff. But then neither is any road, it seems. Roadworks all over the bloody place. But I'm so pleased you came. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was a great chat. Yeah.
And do check out Mark Devlin, his books. I'll put links in the description. But that's it from me. I'll be back with another monologue and, of course, another wonderful guest at some point in the future. But from Mark and myself, thanks for watching. Till next time, goodbye.